Aloha and welcome to Business in Hawaii with Reg Baker. We air live in the Think Tech Studios in the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We talk about positive business stories in Hawaii, and I've got a variety of guests that have success stories that they love to share. Today, however, we've got a slightly different program. Generally, we have a rainbow in the background, but based on the topic, that rainbow went away, and we've got clouds.
Oh.
Today, we're talking about audits, Internal Revenue Service, IRS audits, and Department of Taxation, Hawaii tax audits. We've got a very experienced tax attorney with us today who was also a guest a few months ago and has done work in the medical marijuana business area. So I want to welcome Steve Pingree. He's joining us today. We're going to talk primarily about tax audits, but before we go into that, I want to welcome you back. You're the first guest I've ever had that appeared twice, so back by popular demand. The last time we talked, we had a discussion about the medical marijuana business and how it was still in its developmental stages. Rules and regulations hadn't quite been finalized. And so there's a lot of questions. How has things played out in the last few months?
Very busily. And thank you for having me again. I appreciate that. I'm honored to be back on your program.
My pleasure.
At the very moment, the application period for the medical marijuana dispensary licenses is open. And it has been since January 12th, and it will close on January 29th.
So people can still apply for a license if they wanted to.
Correct.
But there are some things that have to be in place before they can do that or be considered?
Yes. In the middle of December, the Department of Health, who's charged with writing the regulations that carry out the law, if you will, issued their rules and regulations. And that has had people scrambling. But basically, in order to be a successful applicant, an individual has to have been a 5-year Hawaii resident prior to applying.
And they need to prove this.
And they need to prove it with tax returns or driver's license or voting registration or something of that nature. And then also there has to be a second applicant, which is an entity, like an LLC or a corporation. And that has to have been incorporated, formed in Hawaii, and be certified and all of that with DCCA. So that's a prime hurdle. Second hurdle is any individual that's involved as a direct employee or investor, if they own over 25% of the company, they have to submit to what they call an E-Crim, State of Hawaii criminal background check, which basically reports whether or not the individual has ever had a conviction.
Any kind of conviction or?
Felony. That's an interesting point because the law talks about a felony conviction. The Department of Regulations, which is supporting the application form, talks about criminal background or any other activity that might disqualify one. And the language is just that vague.
Sounds subject to interpretation.
Yes, but that's a hoop. There's also a financial hoop that has to be complied with. The Department of Health has its own financial spreadsheet that you have to download and then fill in and upload again. Plus you have to submit your documentation that you had the $1.2 million escrowed in some fashion in October of this year.
So there's a time requirement that it be on deposit for a certain length of time, right?
90 days before the application is submitted. So at the outset, it would be like October 28th, 29th.
Right.
And then people have to submit a plan for the security and the operation and a timeline of when they're going to do it for the dispensary building and operation, and for the cultivation building, and then for the production or the extraction of the marijuana products from marijuana. Those are separate facilities that have to be accounted for and have to show that you've got your proper security and so on.
So for those that don't quite grasp what you just said, including me, the extraction process can be pretty complicated. I mean, it's not just taking some marijuana plants and rolling it up and smoking it or putting it in a pipe. I mean, there's actually pills and medication and other things that can be extracted from the plant that are used for medical purposes.
That's correct. And it is a bit of a complicated process. Chemicals are used, although the state has outlawed butane. But there's CO2 and all alcohol and even water sometimes. But the whole point is to extract the essence of the THC and the CBD, which is the non-hallucinogenic part, out of the plant into some type of form. It could be a liquid too, that could be made into a pill, as you said, or a tincture in drops, or into an oil-based cartridge that can be used with a vapopen, vaporizer pen, or regular health products, salves and ointments and things of that nature.
Interesting.
And then there's another requirement too, and that is that all product must be tested by a state-certified lab before it can be sold.
So there's a quality control aspect.
There is a quality control aspect. There's, without getting into too much detail, there's a tremendous amount of compliance that's going to be expected of these businesses.
I guess in essence, this is a controlled substance that needs to be controlled.
That's correct.
So, and we still have the federal issues.
We do. The marijuana, cannabis, is still totally illegal under federal law. It's categorized as a substance category 1, schedule category 1 of it's in a category where the substances are have no redeeming medical value, and that's the language of the statute. Now you can see about heroin and crystal meth and cocaine and things of that nature, but obviously the argument is there's a lot of additional value.
Well,
but be that as it may, it is illegal. The federal government, the Department of Justice, has come out with some advisory memos, one called the Cole Memo, which is the famous one. But basically they have said if a marijuana business is operating legally within a state and following all the rules, and they're not doing 8 things like selling to minors or having guns around the drugs or selling it to the black market or shipping it across state lines, that type of thing. As long as the operator, the dispensary, is in compliance with that, then the federal government will essentially leave them alone, will not prosecute.
That's what they say.
Well, actually last year Congress passed a bill that forbids, it was a financing bill, forbids the Department of Justice from spending any money to interfere with a state legal business that's operating legally within the state law. So effectively, according to Congress, the Department of Justice, meaning the DEA and so on, are supposed to leave them alone.
Well, I guess time will tell.
I guess they will.
All right. Now, since we kind of spent the last few minutes talking about medical marijuana, we're ready to transition into the IRS audit discussion, right?
Okay.
I guess this is the time of the year for some of this to be top of mind. I guess we're entering into a tax season where, people are gathering together their tax documents. I know there's an awful lot of suspicious emails and telephone calls going on out there that are scams related to the audit process.
Actually, I'd like to speak to that because I got a call yesterday from an attorney friend. He's a tax lawyer, but he's a civil tax lawyer. And he said his mother got a call and this person on the phone demanded that she pay $2,100 immediately, or they would file a lawsuit against her because she owed the IRS $2,100, something like that. And he was very demanding. And he said, don't hang up, because if you hang up, we're going to enforce this. We're going to send this letter and file a lawsuit. And anyway, my friend called me and said, is that an IRS? I said, no, I think it's a scam. First of all, just so people understand, the IRS does not make collection phone calls. They send notices. And if you go on the irs.gov site and look up scams, you'll see very clearly that the IRS says we do not ever call people for collection matters. We don't ask for payment or credit card information over the phone. So anytime if one receives a phone call like that, they should.
Or even emails. I've received several emails in the last month or so, supposedly from the IRS, and it had the IRS US government seal on it. It looked pretty official, except there was some misspelling, and it wasn't quite what I was used to getting. And rarely do I get anything via email from the IRS anyways. But making demands,
Right.
you know, and asking for me to go online and make payment, et cetera, or else they're gonna, you know, garnish my my paycheck or my bank account or whatever.
Right.
So this is the time of the year where a lot of this is taking place.
Right.
And I think it's important for all the citizens, all the viewers out there to understand that there are scam artists out there that's going to be representing themselves as IRS or other Department of Taxation representatives. And please don't be taken in by this. But we are going to talk a little bit about your background and experience. You've been dealing in the civil and criminal side of IRS challenges and inquiries for quite a while. But can you just give us a quick background and how you got into this business?
Sure. Well, first of all, I went to college in California, University of San Diego, University of California at San Diego, and I majored in sociology, which is the study of people and organizations, you know, kind of thing. And then I went to law school in San Diego for 3 years and got my Juris Doctor degree. And then I basically taught college for a while on board Navy ships, teaching business law and contracts and sailing around the world with the Navy. You know, it was a great job. And then in 1975, I sailed my boat from San Diego over here to Hawaii, and I've been here ever since.
How big was this boat?
30 feet.
That gets pretty small after the first week.
Yeah. It does, but you know, boats are small, but everything has a place and everything in its place, you know, if you're efficient. So, but we made it, and I've been in Hawaii ever since. And I started practicing law in '76, and I was initially doing criminal defense, traditional criminal defense, everything from, you know, shoplifting to murder cases and that kind of thing, and also doing divorce work. I had a big divorce practice, and the criminal defense and divorces are not all that different, quite frankly.
Really?
Stressful situations, and people, you know, doing things that they, under normal circumstances, probably wouldn't do.
Emotions are running high.
Yeah. And then I also, as the fun part, I was doing adoptions, private adoptions. I was working with a social worker. So I just throw that in there because it was a real fun part of the practice for a while.
Very good.
And then in the, how I got involved with the IRS, in the early 80s, a friend of mine had a solar sales company. They were salesmen selling solar systems. And if you recall, and I think there still is, you know, there are federal and state tax credits
Yep.
due in the year that the system was purchased. And as it turns out, what was happening was my friend's company and the salesman in the following year, like January, February, March, and sometimes even just before April, would sell a system to a homeowner and then backdate the contract to the previous year so they could get their instant credit. And at that time, the credit pretty much paid for the whole system. So it was...
Those days are long gone, I think.
Yeah. And that's... I got a call one morning from my friend because 2 IRS agents with gold badges came to his house at 7:30 in the morning for an ambush interview, which is what they do.
Well, let me pause here because we're going to go on a quick break, but we've got the special IRS agents with gold badges knocking at the door at 7:30 in the morning.
Right.
And with that, we're going to take a short break. This is Business in Hawaii with Reg Baker. I'm interviewing Steve Pingree, who's a tax attorney here in Honolulu, and we'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I'm a senator from the Big Island in the ER position. Every other Tuesday, I get to host a show here on the Think Tech program about healthcare. We call it Healthcare in Hawaii. It's really enjoyable for me to bring other healthcare leaders from around the state to talk about our pressing issues. Hawaii has long been the health state, but we need to keep up the momentum, the inertia, and with your help and with your participation, we can come and share all of the big issues that are pressing day to day. Thanks for joining us every Tuesday, alternating weeks from 2 to 2:45.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on Think Tech Hawaii. I hope that you will tune in and watch the show. It is inspiring and uplifting and educational also. We talk with artists of all different ilk. We talk with them about what they do, how they do it, and most importantly, most dear to my heart, why they do it. And it never ceases to be fascinating when you get the answer to that question. I hope you'll join us on Center Stage, 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoons. Aloha.
Welcome back. This is Reg Baker, Business in Hawaii. I'm here chatting with Steve Pingree, who's a tax attorney in Honolulu. And we left off with a couple IRS agents with gold badges banging on the door trying to get in about 7:30 in the morning. So Steve, what happened next?
Well, first of all, that's standard IRS Criminal Investigation Division agent protocol. When they have a target, they call them, or a suspect, they always want to interview them when the person is the least expecting it. So 7:30 in the morning is usually when most people, one, they're not expecting it, two, they may not even be awake, hardly. But anyway, so they interviewed my client, and he happened to be akamai enough to say, I want to talk to my attorney, and so that's about all they got out of him. But
Does that pretty much shut it down? If you're in a situation like that, can you tell the agents that you just want to talk to your attorney and they have to back off?
yes. Now, sometimes they push a bit, and they say, well, if you don't have anything to hide, why don't you just talk to us and it'll go easier, But my basic admonition is they are not there to do you a favor, believe me. And anything that you do say to them at that point, especially when they're IRS agents with a gold badge, we'll get into audits.
And a gold badge indicates what?
That they are special agents of the Criminal Investigation Division. They
CID.
carry guns, CID, right. They carry guns, they have arresting power, they conduct grand jury criminal investigations working hand in hand with the U.S. Attorney's Office, and oftentimes co-investigations with the FBI and DEA and so on. But yes, you can refuse to talk to them. They're very intimidating, obviously.
Well, they can be, or they try to be.
They do, and so anyway, my friend called me, told me what happened, and we undertook to represent him. And ultimately, he was, as they say, dead in the water, because it's exactly what they were doing was what he was being accused of. And the IRS was calling that tax evasion and tax fraud. But I took the position that this is really basically a timing difference.
Which would,
the backdating wasn't, something you could really defend, but on the other hand, the taxpayer would have been entitled
to it regardless.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and ultimately, I kept him out of prison because it is a
Well, that was an
5-year felony.
achievement.
Yeah, but he still had to plead guilty to a felony.
All right.
and
Well,
got
that's a
probation.
good way to buy some time then. If you do get ambushed
Right.
and you are caught by surprise,
Right.
asking to talk to your attorney
Right.
is a good tactic to use to give you some time.
Correct. You can say also, I do not want to talk to you, period. You don't necessarily have to say, I want to talk to my lawyer, but it adds a little more weight, I think, if you, the law is very clear that government agents cannot interview somebody without an attorney if they say they don't want to be interviewed.
Now, as mentioned earlier in the show, we are approaching the time of the year where we are going to be doing a lot of tax work, and tax issues are going to be top of mind. The IRS, of course, is the revenue arm, Internal Revenue Service
Right.
of the U.S. government. So their mission is to generate revenue and to collect that revenue.
Correct.
But they've had their budgets cut. They've got some challenges. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, in the last, several years actually, but more recently, the IRS budget has been slashed about 20-some%, which from a logical point of view doesn't make sense that you would cut back the agency that's generating the revenue. But that's what happened. And so the IRS has actually laid off thousands of people. And the Criminal Investigation Division, for example, is down, where they used to have just roughly 2,500 agents. They're probably down to closer to 2,000 or 2,100 agents. That doesn't mean the tax fraud has stopped. They just don't have the ability to...
The manpower isn't there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And the same with the...
And on top of that, though, they've also added more duties and responsibilities on the IRS, like the Affordable Care Act.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that falls more on the revenue agent auditing side, but that's true. And as a matter of fact, I think, didn't Congress just delay that for another
Well,
year?
some of the reporting requirements
right.
of the Affordable Care Act, particularly with the Cadillac tax and
Right.
that sort of thing. But,
Yeah.
but the IRS has had their budget slashed.
Right.
They've been getting a lot of criticism. And on top of that, they've had additional work responsibilities and compliance added to them. And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing the audit rate move a little bit.
Correct. Last year, the audit rate was, in general, for incomes roughly under $200,000, was generally 2% or less. And obviously, the lower your income, the less chances of being audited. So that, from a statistical odds point of view, that's not too bad.
Well, good. Then I have no chance of getting audited ever. So that's
Well,
good to
I don't know
know.
about that, Reg, because when a person's adjusted gross income hits around 200,000 a year, the percentage up to 10 million a year or more, the audit percentages go up and up, up as high as what I read was 24%. So it's the people who are making some good money, and probably because they have either investments or they have a business and maybe kind of complex and that sort of thing. These are the folks that the IRS revenue agents, exam agents, are focusing on.
And is there, but even at the lower end where you've got that 200 to 300 range,
Yeah.
when you get selected for audit, is there usually a reason, something that causes or catch somebody's attention?
Yes, the IRS has developed some fairly sophisticated programs that examine tax returns. And they have, for given occupations and businesses, they have certain profiles, ratios of expenses and deductions and sources of income. And these computers can red flag. For example, if it's, to give you an egregious example, if somebody's reporting $50,000 a year in mortgage interest payments as a deduction and their reported income is only $20,000 or $30,000 a year, well, that's going to...
The math doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly, And believe it or not, sometimes that actually happens. But so a lot of it is triggered by computers. And then as you know, third parties, employers, banks, casinos, real estate escrow companies,
All
and so
those
on.
winnings that we get, those
Right.
gambling winnings.
Exactly.
They get reported.
They do. And so the IRS gets a report for all of these, and they match them against the return. And often, sometimes people will get a letter, which is called a correspondence letter, and they'll say, we have information that, you received X dollars from Y source. Please explain, why was this off your return?
And that'll come in the form of a letter to your residence or mailing address.
Correct.
So it's not an email, it's not necessarily a phone call, it's an actual letter through the Postal Service.
Well, yes, that's true. That's true. The IRS conducts most of its business these days through computers, or with computers. Very little live hands, certainly initially, touch these tax returns and generate audit notices.
Ever since they started requesting, and now we're getting into the requiring stage of electronically filing the tax returns, that's actually, I think, made the process for them a little bit more efficient, because now it goes straight into the system. The software can do their checks,
Analytics.
and then kick out the correspondence letters,
Right.
Asking questions without any human intervention at all.
Right. That's true. And that also, if you get notices and for some reason the IRS is asking for information or requesting money, say, you under-reported your tax return, a friend of mine the other day got a letter from the IRS saying, we changed your tax status. You owe us $950 because one of your dependent Social Security numbers didn't match up. is really frustrating, you know. And so anyway, I got on the phone and it took me, believe it or not, only about 10 minutes, which is really unusual. Because normally now, if you try to call an IRS phone number, you can expect to wait anywhere from 30 to an hour and a half.
Well, and they have the courtesy disconnects, so which is a very interesting term that the IRS uses. I guess if you're on hold for too long,
Right.
they'll disconnect you.
Mm.
And apparently that's a courtesy. So,
But it's the lack of personnel. I mean, they only, depending on which statistics you read, you know, the IRS only answers 40 to 60% of the phone calls.
and how many of those are answered correctly?
That's debatable, quite frankly. I mean, in my experience, when I've talked to the agents on the phone after waiting, they're usually pretty sharp. You know, they have their protocol and they have to go through it, and then you give them certain information. You know, like the Social Security number for the dependent that I told you about. It turns out that the taxpayer had given the wrong number by one digit, 575 instead of 576. So, but anyway, so that worked out, and the agent on the phone verified and
Well,
eliminated that
Good
tax.
that they got resolved so quickly.
But I want to make a point, and that is when anybody gets a notice from the IRS, whatever kind of notice it is, they should never ignore it. Because ignoring the computers, there's always a response date, you know, contact us or pay or do something within 10 days or 30 days, that type of thing. And if you don't, if you ignore that notice, then what happens is the computer picks up and starts going to the second level and starts kicking out more and more severe notices, and perhaps adding more penalties and interest. And you know, if you ignore that notice, then you get
It
down to
just
the
keeps
point
climbing,
exactly
yeah.
where they're threatening to levy your bank accounts, and, which they can do.
Yeah,
And so,
very good. Well, any advice? I mean, are there certain red flags? And we've only got a couple minutes before our next break, but we can get into it and
Okay.
wrap it up after the break. But what words of advice do you have for some of the taxpayers or the viewers out there to kind of
right.
avoid any issues?
Well, first of all, this applies not only to taxpayers, to the individuals, but it also applies to the accountants, the CPAs and enrolled agents and so on, because they should be looking for these red flags, and some of this information I'm about to say should be helpful to taxpayers too. Okay, first of all is if there's an unusual income, for example, the taxpayer's lifestyle as he's talking to the accountant just doesn't match up with, you know, let's say he's driving a new Mercedes and has a new house and he's reporting $50,000 a year in income. You know, that's going to raise a red flag without some serious investigation. And by the way, I have been informed, speaking of investigation, that CPAs are advised by the American Institute of CPAs that they are not auditors.
Well,
And-
not tax auditors.
They're not tax auditors, right. So as part of a normal tax return preparation, the CPA may not want to delve into too much information. In my opinion, from my perspective, that's a mistake. At least a cursory look at the profiles and see if it makes sense, you know. And usually what I do is recommend that at least get the bank records for the current year, maybe the past year, just to see. You can tell a lot, especially an accountant can tell a lot from bank records. So,
But that would only be if there was something that didn't appear to be
right,
correct. You know,
Right.
that they could take that step to verify information.
right. For example, the high mortgage interest deduction with low income kind of thing. Unusual rise in net worth. You got to review the sources of the investment, or
Where that money came from.
yeah, that would probably come up because the previous tax returns were inconsistent.
Right.
You know, and,
Well, I'm going to ask to take a pause right here.
Okay.
We've got a short break. We're going to have to leave for just a minute. This is Reg Baker, Business in Hawaii. I'm chatting with Steve Pingree, who's an attorney and specializes in the tax defense area. So we'll be right back in about 60 seconds.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. We hear, and you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I have guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with Think Tech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Welcome back. This is Reg Baker, Business in Hawaii. I'm chatting with a tax attorney here by the name of Steve Pingree. He's been practicing tax law for many years, and he's just now getting into the red flag issues to hopefully keep us out of trouble.
I wanted to mention something about IRS audits and what the revenue agents are trained to do and what they're looking for. If you as a taxpayer gets a notice of an audit, and it's usually accompanied by what they call an IDR, information document request. They want certain information, certain documents, and so on. You know, you're being audited, blah, blah, blah. And be very, very careful, because the information document request is the clue, if you will, as to what they're looking for, even though it seems fairly routine. And one thing that most people don't know is that the IRS has what's called a fraud technical advisor group. And these are specially trained revenue agents that do nothing but look for fraud. And they work with the auditors. So you think the auditor is a civil auditor and he's just asking you for information. He maybe wants to make an adjustment on your tax return. And in fact, they're looking for fraud. So they're looking for red flags. And it's legally questionable because the law says, and the IRS regs say, that the civil audit division is not allowed to look for and seek out and obtain evidence to be used for criminal prosecution. So there's a real fine line that they walk there. But just be aware that it's a warning to don't be too eager to cooperate immediately.
Well, and I think also it would be good to be cautious because some of these agents are well-trained.
Yes,
in
they are.
how to conduct interviews and how to phrase the question,
Right.
and to win, I guess, in a sense, your friendship. So you tend to open up a little bit and talk to them, and they're trained to do that. So, you know, asking for your attorney right close up to the front end probably isn't a bad idea.
Yeah. Well, first of all, taxpayers always have the right to have a representative. You know, so if it's an attorney or the CPA, that's their right. They don't have to talk to the auditors up front, so don't be embarrassed. One area that I want to mention that is a really big red flag, and that is any indication that there are foreign assets or foreign bank accounts. Now, on the tax return, there are two questions, and they ask whether or not you have a foreign bank account. It's called the FBAR, Foreign Bank Account Report. And if, in general, you have a bank account overseas outside the United States and it's got $10,000 or more at any time during the year, you must check that box. And then you must report the bank, the account number, the address, the
Average balance.
average balance and things like that. So, and a lot of people don't report that. There's another form that's called the Federal Accounting Tax Compliance Act. And this basically goes into, do you have businesses and assets and investment accounts and all that sort of thing overseas too? And if the auditor is asking for, or asks you just a bland question, you know, do you have overseas accounts? Do you have offshore bank accounts? There's a good possibility that they think you do, and they're looking to see what your answer is.
And this is a big area for them right now. This is one of the few areas that they're actually putting some resources in and getting cooperation from some foreign banks for reporting. Right. And it's an area that, for lack of a better term, may be viewed as some low-hanging fruit for them to go out and be able to capture some of these foreign assets,
Right.
and the taxes on these can be pretty hefty.
That's true. And the penalties, 50 to 75% of your highest balance, I mean, they can be very punitive, if you will. Just people think Swiss bank accounts are inviolate, you know, that their privacy is sacrosanct, and that's gone.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Not since about 5-6 years ago with United Swiss Bank, USB. They were charged, and a couple of people actually, individuals, went to prison over that. But basically, USB was forced to disgorge about 5,000 account holders that were U.S. citizens, and then the IRS kept pursuing it, and the Swiss government actually started to cooperate. They did basically drop the privacy requirement. There was some statutory moves and so on, but there were a lot of Swiss banks that have entered into what they call deferred prosecution agreements by paying millions of dollars in fines to the IRS because they accepted U.S. citizen bank accounts.
That by itself has been a good revenue source for the
Billions.
IRS.
Billions. But the IRS calculates there's some $2 trillion of U.S. funds offshore.
And they're looking for them.
They are. And they're very aggressive about it. And if somebody has a credit card, a lot of people think, you know, if I could just make a small deposit in an offshore bank in the Cayman Islands or something like that, and I'll get this credit card, and you know, it'll be a way that I can spend my offshore money without being detected. That's not true. All of the credit card companies have agreements with the IRS, and the IRS is able to get a report from the credit card companies with names and addresses.
Again, this is all electronic, so it happens pretty quick. There's a
does.
matching up process
Right.
that takes place, and these names pop out pretty quickly.
Right, that's true.
Now, you mentioned earlier that, you know, that you can always, somebody who's getting an audit or gets a letter can always have a representative there. Who should that representative be? I mean, can any attorney or any CPA, I mean, I guess they can serve in that capacity, but are they qualified to serve in that capacity?
Well, at the risk of tooting my own horn, you know, there aren't that many attorneys, even tax attorneys, that are comfortable representing the IRS when they're conducting an audit, especially if the audit looks like what we call an eggshell audit, which means on the outside it looks benign, but once you really get into the books and records, you can see that there was some mischief. There aren't too many CPAs, frankly, that represent taxpayers in complicated audits. And part of that is that there's no privilege between CPAs and clients. So like with an attorney, you know, the taxpayer can talk to the attorney and tell them everything, and then it's all privileged information. But it's important that one get a representative that knows how to deal with the IRS and the state.
Yeah, because I would imagine it can get complicated, and it's not always a direct line to get to resolution. You got to be able to know how to work through that system.
That's true. Yeah, because a lot of information control. I mean, you have to give up certain information, you know, bank records and corporate records and things of that to have no legal privilege. But there are other documents that do have a legal privilege. And you know, my job, for example, is to monitor the information flow and try to limit the scope of it so that the audit doesn't get out of hand.
And, you know, that's a good point, because I know from my experience when I've been in situations like
Right.
this, sometimes the taxpayer or the client tends to talk maybe a little too much. He tries to make that connection and be friendly and show cooperation. And this is one of the times where less is better.
That's true. But human nature being what it is, people are always, especially if they're guilty at all, they always feel like they can talk their way out of it, or there's an explanation, and so on. I had a case not too long ago from a medical professional in one of the outer islands. He received a letter from an IRS group in New York. And it basically said, we want to see all your bank records, and they asked him a bunch of questions about financial transactions. And even in that letter, the IRS said, we believe that you have underreported your income. which was really surprising because that's an accusation of a criminal offense, and actually it's the first time I've ever seen that. But the taxpayer and his accountant felt like they could explain it all away, so they sent back a response. And then the New York IRS office wrote them back and said, thank you for your response. We'd like to have a personal interview with you. And so at that time, the professional contacted a civil tax lawyer here in town who referred him to me, and I came on board and represented him. And the case was assigned to an agent in one of the outer islands.
Oh, so they didn't actually fly somebody from New York?
No. I have no idea where it generated in New York. The IRS, you get notices from all over the country from the IRS these days. It makes sense to them, I guess, but not to us. And it turned out that, in fact, this professional was skimming. He was not reporting all of his cash income.
Oh, boy.
And, he could have really opened the door. I was able to think about it for a while, and then because he's a medical professional, all of his records are protected by HIPAA. This patient
So you had a
secrecy
double
requirement.
cloak. You had two cloaks there. You had the attorney cloak, and then you had the HIPAA cloak.
Right. And so I just put that up there as a hurdle that the agent was going to have to get over, and some conversations and some talking and so on and so forth. But ultimately, they dropped the case.
Well, and it triggered another question. It's maybe not directly related, but dealing with the IRS these days, dealing with a human person. I mean, I remember 20 years ago, there was actually staff out here that worked out at the federal building that you could actually communicate and talk to and build relationships with. It's different now, isn't it?
Very, very different. It's very difficult to, what I used to do, was just walk over to the federal building and go talk to one of the revenue agents or the revenue officers who are the collection agents, or CID. But they're not available now. They basically only will talk with you if they want to talk,
And they're not even located here as much? I mean, most of them have
not as
left?
much. I mean, they moved out of the federal building now. The IRS is located in the, 1019? 1099 Alakea. 1099 Alakea building.
But we won't
yeah.
tell them what suite.
Well, they're on the 12th floor, so it's
Oh,
okay.
oh.
But believe me, you can't get in. I mean, all the doors are coded, padlocked, and you have to
Even the
get
bathrooms.
Exactly, that's true. That's true. You have to get on the phone and call the agent and say, I'm here, for our appointment, kind of thing. But because it's so impersonal now, trying to deal with the IRS and the state to some degree, although they're a little more personable, it makes it very, very difficult. So.
Well, all the more reason, I think, to get somebody who's familiar with the process
Right.
and to be able to, work their way through it, because
Right.
it can be a maze at times, try to get to the resolution of some things.
Right.
Very good. Well, any final comments? We've got a little more than a minute left. Any last words of advice during this tax time of the year? It'd be nice to be able to get that rainbow in the back again, and bring some bright spots to the conversation. But
I think records are important, documentation is important, working with your accountant, your CPA, to give them as much information as you possibly can, and so they'll feel comfortable, but you should also, and ask questions, but during the year, it's important to document expenses, obviously, and income and that type of thing. And if you are ever contacted, I've said this before, but if you're ever contacted, you receive a notice in writing from the IRS, don't ignore it.
good
Don't,
advice.
yeah, don't ignore it.
All right, very good. And if anybody had any other questions for you that they needed to follow up on, you have a phone number they can call?
I do.
And that is?
983-9520.
Very good.
983-9520.
And it was just on the screen, and there it is again. All right, very good. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Reg.
Appreciate you coming on, being a
you.
guest and helping to explain some of these things. This is Reg Baker, Business in Hawaii. We air every Thursday at 2 o'clock. We talk about positive business stories in Hawaii. Looking forward to seeing you next week. Aloha.